British tourists have been warned about travelling to France as riots grip the country.
In fact, the Foreign Office has updated its travel advice now, warning British holidaymakers about possible curfews and disruptions to transport.
Violence and looting have continued for a fourth night in France after a teenager was fatally shot by police at a traffic stop.
Let's talk now to political commentator Alex Story. Good morning, Alex.
Morning.
I mean, it was a terrible incident, what happened with the shooting of that young man in France, in Paris. But why has it erupted all over the country in such terrible rioting?
I think it's taken us by surprise in Britain because for some reason there's been a news blackout between what's been happening in France and what we've been receiving as information in the UK. It's really important to realise that this circle of violence has been constant. I mean, you might remember the story of Lola, that young girl that was found dead in a suitcase a few months back. You also remember a lot of the incidents from 2015, 2016. You'll remember the Charlie Hebdo attacks. France has been in a virtual state of civil unrest for the last 20 years. It's really important to see, I think, in this particular issue, the reason why it's blown up is because there's been a residual amount of discontent with Macron, with the state, and at the same time we've had we had filmed evidence of the tragic shooting. That in itself has become a cocktail for discontent, but it doesn't excuse the very high level of violence that we see unfurling across France.
But what we also have seen with this, which I guess tends to be a common thing, partly down to social media, is there is an assumption that this was not a justified or righteous shooting before there's been a full investigation, actually.
Well, I think that's partially the problem. The police in France, as I mentioned before, is in a constant state of emergency, actually, and the President Macron decided to side with the perpetrator in a way. I mean, if you look at the photographic evidence or the film evidence, it's not really clear that the police officer acted badly. In addition, the police officer is a decorated officer. He had, I think, 2 or 3 medals for valor, one that was given to him by the Ministry of the Interior. So he was actually a reputed, very well-respected officer. And I think the idea that you just judge somebody before you gauge whether they were innocent or guilty is one of these things that happens more and more in today's world, perhaps because of social media, but perhaps because politicians find it a convenient way or an easier way to try and take pressure out of a situation. But actually, that's the wrong thing to do.
It's interesting because social media has clearly played quite a big part, almost coordinating some of these riots. And it's thought that it's very young, well, not very young, but young children or young people, teenagers, who are taking part in these riots because social media is telling them, urging them to. And meanwhile, President Macron is telling parents to keep your kids indoors.
Well, that's right. I mean, one of the things that he's been saying is, or they've been seeing because of the arrests that have been made, is that you have a lot of children under 14. There is obviously the thing about social media is that it makes you a star instantly. You know, if you're the person that torches a car, there've been 2,000 cars that were burnt over the last 3 days in France alone. That's quite a large number, and you can see the excitement. A young child goes out, he feels that he's got the power. He burns a car, or he attacks a building, and eventually he gets 1,000 likes on social media. So that is an issue, and we also have to try and get to the. We also have to be. We have to be critical about the way that the youngsters have behaved, rather than do the usual knee-jerk reaction of attacking the forces of law and order in France. I think that's really important, to at least give them some time to be able to restore the situation.
How does France go about resolving the bigger situation here? Because you say, a series of incidents, high tension, high pressure. I mean, even since the Gilets jaunes stuff a few years ago, I mean, there just seems to have been nothing but protests in France for a very long time over differing issues. Is this something that can be resolved? Is this a long-term problem?
Well, it's a very difficult one because France has a very complex past. I'll go through it quickly. But since the French Revolution, we had 5 republics, 4 monarchies, 3 revolutions, 2 empires, and a fascist state during the Second World War under Pétain. So you've got every 15 or 16 years there is a new desire for change, and very often in France it comes through violence. The reason why I'm saying all of this is because we have to realize that the French Republic is a very unstable creation. It's the 5th one, as I said, and every time you go through, every time you look at or you try to understand the situation in France, the option is always to dismantle the order that you currently have in order to get somewhere new or to a new and better place. In Britain, we've had the same monarchy for the last 1,000 years, so we never had this desire for change or for societal change. But the key philosophy in France is that you can change through violence, and that's really what's being taught at school as well. I went to school in France, and I remember being told to revere the French Revolution and the killing of the king and everything else. It was seen as progress, and the problem is, if that's what you want, if that's what you teach your children that the best way to get change is through street violence. And in fact, in France, the street is seen as an arm of democracy. So you have the parliament, you have the republic, and you have the street as legitimate places to conduct your democratic right, and that leads inevitably to violence.
And it must be almost impossible to police. I mean, I know the police have come in for a lot of criticism, and they themselves have said that they are at war with savage hordes of vermin in France. It's not a good look for anyone, especially when President Macron is seen dancing at an Elton John gig while Paris was burning. Not a good look at all.
Yeah, I mean, people tend to say that history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure rhymes. And there's a certain sense of 1789 there, with Marie Antoinette asking her citizens to eat brioche rather than bread. There is this sense of decadence as well with the French elite, where Macron gets sucked into greater and greater supranational and globalist types of meetings, whereas at home his nation is falling apart. I mean, what we have seen as well is the inevitable rise of Le Pen, and one of the articles that I wrote about 5 years ago was the fact that France needs to have the flexibility of its own currency in order to be able to deal with its very rigid social system. But the problem is that the euro is a straitjacket that is imposing an enormous amount of constraints on the French economy. And so what we are seeing is perhaps the inevitable rise and victory of the Le Penist, of Le Pen at the next presidential election in a couple of years' time.
Okay. Really good to see you this morning, Alex Storey. Thanks very much indeed. You know what? It's the first time I've heard an analysis quite like that makes me think, actually, we've got a lot to thank the monarchy for.
Yeah.
I know we've always talked about the fact it brings stability. I never thought of it bringing stability in those terms.
No. But, I mean, a lot of people, when you say that there are terrible riots going on, a lot of people say, oh, well, the French are always rioting about something. And that is, now we've just heard why. And that's fascinating. But would it put you off going to France for your holidays at the moment?
Would at the minute.
Yeah, it would, because it's flaring up anywhere. It's not just Paris. It seems to be flaring up all over the place. And you wouldn't want to be, facing that sort of thing in the streets around where you were staying.
Isn't it interesting? Well, it's the same when things happen over here, anywhere, I guess. There are just some people who just will jump on any excuse to have a bit of a riot or...
But those pictures just look terrible.
I mean, horrific.
Explosions and 20,000 cars on fire, didn't he say?
No, I think it was 2,000.
No, I think it was 20, he said.
We'll have to play that back.
Yeah.
See, but a lot of cars, nonetheless.
Could you respin us and just tell us what it was that was... I think he said 20,000. It was an astonishing figure, anyway, for 4 days.
Scary, isn't it?